Hello. Um, I always get so very nervous every time I am going to do this. And you would think that eventually that would end, but it hasn't. It doesn't seem to be going to end anytime soon. So I'm just going to sit here with my nerves for a hot minute and take a few breaths. And I hope it's live. I think it's live. And if not, I guess I'll just post it later when I'm done recording. Oh, it is live. Hello, DJ Nico. Hello. I'm glad you're here. And I'm glad you said hi. I hope you can hear me okay. But let me know otherwise in the comments if the sound is bad or low. I don't know how to adjust it, but I can adjust my speaking volume. Hello Dee. Hi Irish Marts. Hi guys. Oh, I'm so happy to see you here. Thank you, Nico. It sounds good. Excellent. Volume's good. Okay, cool. So, guys, new year, new me. No, I'm just kidding. But it is a new year. I don't do New Year's resolutions as such, but I do New Year's goals. I like to set goals for the year. Most of the time, they're the same thing. Work out more, eat healthier. And most of the time, I am just as bad at doing that as the year before. But sometimes it's like read this many books, and sometimes I do manage that, and sometimes it's fun things like go to lots of museums, and that's also a really good New Year's goal. It could be whatever you want. Anyways, one of my New Year's goals for this year is to try to be a little bit more active here on the YouTubes. So here I am in all my nervousness, trying to be more active. And I thought I would just, for this first video of the new year, catch you guys up on a bit of what's been happening with me, because I haven't been very active in a while. I think I've done like 3 videos since August, which is not even one a month. Hello, Matmidro Gel. I don't know if I said that name right. I don't think I did. Anyways, so I was thinking we'll just have a chat to start off this new year of making more videos. And I'll start with filling you in a bit on what's happened. And basically, it's been a lot. I've had a lot. I work at a school, and the autumn term is always busier than the spring term. And this year was extra busy. It was just, it was kind of like chaos, and I almost burnt out. I, a couple times felt like I can't even do this anymore. It was too much stress at work, and I was having a lot of stress symptoms, and actually a couple times got quite sick, which I tend to do when I'm under a lot of stress. And, I spent many weeks at home, not in a row, but, different weeks here and there during the autumn term at home, and just trying to not be as stressed and trying to recuperate. So there's been a lot of stress at work, and added to that, I also did my evaluation for ADHD and autism. Dee's wondering where I live. I live in Stockholm, Sweden. And yeah, we're going to talk a little bit about the weather as well. Okay, so yeah, basically there was a lot at work. It was too much, and I wasn't keeping up with anything in life really. And then on top of that, I did an evaluation for ADHD and autism, and I was diagnosed with ADD, which is attention deficit disorder, and with ASD, autism spectrum disorder. I'm pretty sure that's what it stands for. Which I have been kind of identifying myself as for a while now. But now I have it like on paper. Like professionals who are educated on this have said, yes, this is correct. My brain is different, I guess. Chuck, you did ADHD and scored 99%. I did a test. Did you do a test for ADHD? Because I mean, okay, so I did, I realize the evaluations are done differently, I guess, for everybody. And in different countries, it's done different ways as well. And so I did quite a few of these like forms where you rate yourself on a scale. And I scored pretty high on some of those forms and very low on some of them. Yes, I'm neurospicy. Or neurosparkly, or both, or neuro nonconformist is a word I made up yesterday, which I also think suits me. Anyways, but yeah, so I don't really present hyperactivity. I do present in some cases. I present in hyperactivity, mostly in impulse control. I have not great impulse control. I'll have an idea and then I'll just run with it, and then I'll try to figure out the logistics and stuff after. But yeah, but mostly it's attention deficiency. I get really distracted easily. My brain is wandering a lot, and I have like so many thoughts going on inside my brain that usually I can't even pick one out of the jumble of thoughts going on, which makes it hard to concentrate on stuff that's happening in the here and now. Also affects my working memory, which is, I mean, everybody with ADD or ADHD probably has poor working memory. And because of that, also usually poor long-term memory can affect people in different ways. Just said. So ADD, attention deficit disorder, and most of my symptoms are executive function. I mean, the whole thing is really about executive function, but I either can't get started with something or I can't stop doing the thing I'm doing because I get like stuck in a hyper focus. And usually what that means is I burn myself out because I start, like, especially this autumn, there's been a lot of stress at work, and I start working and I just work for like 10 hours straight. And then I'm like, oh, I should probably have a snack or take a break. And then, yeah, so I can burn myself out pretty easy. So I'll be working with my boss to try to figure out different systems to make sure I don't overwork, even though there's a lot of stress and there's a lot of work at work right now. It's not my responsibility to deal with all of it. And we need to make sure I don't get like super hyper focused and get stuck in at work. So that was exciting. And I was also got diagnosed with autism, so autism spectrum disorder, which I haven't actually, so I read up a bit on ADHD because that was actually what I asked for an evaluation about. And when I was doing my initial like pre-evaluation to see if I needed an evaluation, we talked about, because one of the things you do when you do an evaluation for ADHD is you also rule out if it could be something else. So we also talked about a whole bunch of different things. And during that, it was 5 visits with a psychiatrist or psychologist and psychiatrist. And during those 5 visits, they added autism to the list of things to evaluate, which I was surprised by. I was like, I'm not autistic. I can look people in the eyes, which, tells you about how much I knew about autism at the time. But I had read up a bit on ADHD, so I feel like I know about that a little bit more, and I don't know a lot about autism yet. Obviously, I'm going to be learning more about autism. Yeah, so that was very interesting. We also looked at other things like OCD, which I have O and C, but I don't have D. Basically, I do have obsessive compulsive tendencies in different areas of my life, but they don't disrupt my life in any way, so it's not really a disorder. And when I did the autism part of the evaluation, the psychologist, she said, like, at the end, I'd met her like 4 times by then, and she said, like, that she sees a lot of the autism symptoms in me, but she didn't see she didn't see it affecting me negatively. And so with a diagnosis, you can have like a lot of symptoms. I mean, it's a huge spectrum, right? You can have at one end people who you wouldn't think maybe don't have autism, and then at the other end you have people who are nonverbal or really need help in everyday situations. And one of the things she was pointing out was that, well, one of the things was eye contact, and that I was pretty good in the conversation with her, and I kind of laughed, and I told her about TRs, the Scientology training routines, and I was like, I've been training to hold eye contact since I was 7 years old, and it's horribly uncomfortable. Yeah, but I know how to do it. And so we had to talk a lot about if the symptoms of autism that I seem to have, if they affected my life in any way. And we also had to, during the evaluations, because ADHD and autism are both, it's not something you get, you're built that way, right? So in order to receive a diagnosis, the symptoms have to have been present even in childhood. And this was quite taxing for me because let's talk a lot about my childhood, which is not always fun to talk about. And then we had to try to sort through what was the cult and the cult abuse and what was maybe a symptom of autism or ADHD. And basically, I was going to a psychiatrist once a week for 6 weeks during this evaluation, and that took quite an emotional toll on me as well. And then after that, there was 4 weeks of, when I got my diagnosis, there was 4 weeks of, okay, these are like a mini course in ADHD. I'll be going to the autism one in February, but I did like a mini course in ADHD. What is ADHD, and like how can it affect you, and what kind of strategies can you think about to try to alleviate the symptoms and the way they're affecting your life as much as possible. And I also recently just started ADHD medication. So yeah, it's been bringing up a lot, and it's been like a heavy emotional load for me to deal with on top of the stress at work. And so I'm also going to add to that SAD. So ADD, ASD, and SAD. SAD is seasonal affective disorder. And basically, I live in Sweden, in Stockholm, so not like the north of Sweden. But we have, in the wintertime here, very little sunlight, daylight hours. So I think the sun is going up at around 10 in the morning, and it's going down, it's like dark by 3 p.m. So, I mean, it's dark when I go to work. if I go out for a walk during lunch, that's the only time I see the sun, and then it's dark when I go home. And I do tend to have like the winter blues or like depression, although it tends to catch up with me later, like in February. That's usually when it's worse. I tend to be able to power through a bit during the autumn, but this year it kind of just hit me really hard. And mostly it's like my energy level just bottoms out and I don't have the energy to do anything. So yeah, that's that's what I've been up to. I've just been putting my head down and getting through an autumn term that was emotionally draining for me. Yeah, I see a lot of questions. Okay, so I'm going to try to catch up on some questions in chat. And then I was thinking I might talk about Stockholm Syndrome as well, because I've had a few questions on it, because it's in my handle. Okay, I don't know how far back I need to go. Let's see. So I'll just pop some up. I already answered this, but yeah, I live in Stockholm in Sweden. And DJ also lives in Sweden. Yeah, snowy Sweden. Yeah, we do have a bit of snow right now. We didn't have snow for Christmas, but I had a cold and just stayed in the sofa all days anyway, so it didn't really matter. Let's see. The test on ADHD and scored 99%. Yeah, like I said, I don't know how, I don't think tests are done the same for every person or in every country and so on. I scored really high on some of the self-assessment tests, and I scored quite low on some of the others. And I think it just varies also. As I said, I don't really present hyperactive, except for my hyperactive brain, which is just constantly running around doing whatever it wants to do. And I think then that's probably normal to, then it would be normal that would test low on the questions that have to do with hyperactivity. And I think also when you add autism to it, it becomes complicated. I was going to do an ADHD test, but I could not get around to focus on it. Just kidding. I mean, yeah, all the things I've been meaning to get around to do could probably make a receipt that goes around the world. So let's see. I'm just gonna pop this up. Neurospicy, and yeah, I just love the term. I have since I first heard it. Neurospicy. I've also heard neurosparkly, and yeah, and then I made up my own yesterday, which is neuro nonconformist. It's fun. I mean, don't get me wrong. They're called disorders for a reason. There's so many things I struggle with, but I'm glad that this is something that's being more accepted in society. And like when I had a conversation with my boss, when I got the note from the doctor, and she was very understanding that, okay, so we need to find a way to work around this. And I don't think the reactions would have been the same 10, 20 years ago, and even worse, before then. So DJ, suffer from burnout and brain fatigue. I'm really sorry to hear that. I burned out really, really hard about 8 or 9 years ago. And it was the worst. It was horrible. Yeah, and the brain fatigue is, for me, that I had a bit of an identity crisis when I burnt out, because I have always considered myself not naturally smart, I would say, but like a fast learner. And when I burnt out, I just struggled so much with learning. And I also, like my reading speed, I've never been a fast reader, but I used to read a lot, and my reading speed just kind of slowed down even more which makes me sad because then I don't have time to read as many books as I want to, or that I used to be able to read. And also I just didn't have the my concentration, like my ADD symptoms when I burnt out got a lot worse, and I couldn't concentrate. I, you know, I couldn't even watch a full movie when I was burnt out because I forgot what the plot was about 30 minutes in. And I really struggled with reading and learning new things, which has always been, for me, something like learning new stuff is kind of what keeps me going. Like I like finding out new things. And then when I was really struggling with that, I had like a bit of an identity crisis. Checks. Oh, this is in regards to the 99%. Yeah, sleep is always such an issue for a lot of people. Actually, I think there are studies that show like 70% of the world population has sleep issues from time to time. My sleep is really weird. I had insomnia for a huge part of my life, actually. Even when I was a little kid in the cult, I had a really hard time falling asleep. But once I was asleep, you couldn't wake me. I slept through fire alarms and everything, you just couldn't wake me once I was asleep. But I had insomnia for a long time. And then after my kid was born, I woke up for the slightest noise. I mean, really, like the slightest anything. So even after she wasn't sleeping in the same room as us, when she rolled over in her bed in the other room, that woke me up. And then I still had insomnia at that time. So at that time, I just pretty much didn't sleep for like 3 years or something, because I had insomnia and I was waking up for everything, which was really bad. But not everybody with ADHD has sleep issues. So, yeah. Welcome to the Fabulous Club. It is kind of like a club. Yeah. I'm just going to pop this up here. Yes and no. I mean, so if I could hit a button and all of a sudden be neurotypical, I would, because it would make life much easier. But I can also do kind of cool things that neurotypicals probably don't. Like I can get into hyperfocus and just go for 10 hours. Not as much anymore because I've been burnt out a couple times and I'm older now. So I don't really have the stamina anymore. But I used to be able to just, I once got a new fantasy trilogy, and I think I started reading them on Friday afternoon, and I just continued reading until Monday morning. I probably ate because I get hangry, but I don't think I slept or anything. I was super hyper-focused. Is autism prefer to not be around people? No. Although this is something that you commonly, I think, is something. Okay, so like I said, I haven't read up as much on autism yet, but basically, I mean, you don't being autistic doesn't automatically make you not like other people or automatically make you an introvert. An introvert also likes being around people usually, but it tires them. So it drains energy, whereas an extrovert will gain energy from hanging out with others. An introvert will be drained, even if they like it. But autism does have, so for many, I think most or all people on the autism spectrum, it's hard to read other people. So it's hard to read social cues and understand things. And that means that you're working, like your brain is working twice as hard to interpret what is going on in the conversation, which means you get very tired or you just don't understand. For me, I struggle with this when the facial expression and what is being said don't match. So I struggle a lot with like sarcasm and irony. And if people are putting on a good face, but they're saying something that's not good, then I really struggle to interpret what's going on in the situation. Yeah. And like also a lot of autistics take things very literally. So I know a lot of like idioms and things, but I tend to interpret them literally before I find out they're an idiom. So for example, the first time I heard the expression read between the lines, I I thought there were like hidden messages in between the lines in books. Like there was a second book in, like if I could just figure out the secret formula to make the hidden text appear, I could read like a second book within the book. That's just like one example. So I have to like learn expressions, and I can't really tell if someone is being serious or not serious, if it's like sarcasm or joke. And yeah, I struggle with, and this was also something we had to talk about a lot because, you know, I grew up doing the training routines and communication course, which is a very, very structured way to have a conversation. And as long as I was in the cult and the other person I was speaking to was following this same structure of communication, I didn't have communication issues. But when I left the cults, I find conversations sometimes it's hard for me to interpret what's going on sometimes. I don't know if I'm explaining this correctly. But no, it's like, there's this old perception that autistics don't have friends, but autistics, as far as I can tell, they have friends, usually other neurotypical, spicy people, and they usually form really tight bonds. It's not like there's no such thing as a casual friendship. I struggle with that as well. Like, I don't know where to, like when I meet someone new and I really want to get to know them, you know, I tend to like text them all the time, and it can overwhelm them. They can get scared or back off, you know. Yeah. I also struggle, something I struggle with a lot is when it's my turn in the conversation, if there are several people talking, like on a lunch break at work, and I'm sitting with 8 colleagues, I never know when it's my turn to speak. And I also don't know when I should shut up, because I'll start talking about something and I'll just keep going and going and going and going. And then nobody else gets to say anything. And then they start giving me the stink eye, and I'm like, oh, I made a mistake here. All right, let's see. It's a spectrum. It is a spectrum. Both ADHD and autism are massive spectrums. And it's undiagnosed, yeah. It's also ADHD in particular is commonly missed in girls, because it's quite common that girls don't have the hyperactivity part that boys do. And for a long time, that's what you looked for, the hyperactivity, you know, not being able to sit still. Whereas people with ADD, like I have, I can sit still and I can sit through the class. That's not a problem. It's just my focus isn't there because my brain is, you know, everywhere else. My brain isn't sitting still, but my body is. But nobody can see that. So, All right. Oh no, I'm really far behind, I think. I'm gonna pop this up. Let's see. Yes, I had a lot of symptoms that were overlooked because they didn't disrupt. And yeah, actually, the last session I had, we had to talk about if all the symptoms I had did disrupt my life enough for a diagnosis, which we came to the conclusion that they do. I struggle a lot. Masking is a word that I've learned quite a bit about, which is like you put on a mask, and I love that line from the Jim Carrey movie, The Mask. We all wear masks, metaphorically speaking. I've worn a mask. I feel like I've worn a mask for most of my life, and especially in the cults. And I learned which mask was acceptable when and where and with who. And I learned how to like seamlessly switch masks depending on who was in my immediate vicinity, which is also some things that I do subconsciously. I've done it for so long and I do it subconsciously. But for example, my accent will change depending on who I'm speaking with. And I don't mean to, but I mirror the people I'm around all the time. And I'm trying to learn how to turn that off because I want to be more authentically me. I want to be the person I am and not mirroring someone else in order to try to fit in. If that makes sense. There's a saying, if you know one person with autism, you know one person. Yeah. It's a wide spectrum. No two people present the same. I 100% agree with this. I don't think there's yeah. Just like neurotypicals, we are all so different. And yeah, the spectrum is huge and endless. And also, I get that it's hard to diagnose because it's also a lot of it is just human behavior. And even if you don't have ADHD or ADD, you will probably present those symptoms when you're stressed or when you're tired or at some points during your life anyways. So it's, yeah. All right, let's see. Son is getting married next year. Everybody has had 35 years of depression, anxiety. He's been off work about 4 times. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, depression and anxiety are rough. I actually have medicated for depression for the last 8 years, and it's really hard to deal with. I do think I was depressed at the time when I started antidepressant medications. I was also burnt out. But I don't think I used to think I had clinical depression, but I don't think I do. As I'm learning more about autism and ADHD, and I'm not blaming myself as much for my symptoms, which I have previously thought that's just me being lazy or being stupid. And now I know this could be a symptom of ADD or autism, and I'm not being as hard on myself. And in this, I mean, I'm not all the way there yet. It's going to take time to shift that mindset, but in the process of this, I've been thinking maybe I haven't actually been depressed all this time. I've just been very hard on myself. I did have a lot of anxiety though. Although I've never medicated for anxiety, I've tried a few anxiety meds and they've never worked well for me. So I've never medicated for anxiety. However, I have noticed on the medication for ADHD that I started recently, my anxiety level has halved. Like I think that's so far it's the most noticeable change of me being on ADHD meds is the anxiety is so much less, and it's leaving me with more and more energy because I'm not spending nearly as much energy being super anxious about everything. And I'm kind of surprised by that. And I spoke with my doctor, of course, and I do all this in communication with my doctor, and I've gone off my antidepressants, and we're gonna see what happens. So that'll be interesting. It'll be interesting. I know there's gonna be, things are gonna be happening. Hey, Emily, I think that's how we say it. Jag är en kvart sen, men kul, du är inte sen. You're never late. You're not late. You can always watch it at your own pace. Doesn't matter. But glad to see you here. Thank you. The cocktail, I call it, of med seems to work. I'm glad that's working. Good. Hubby has a disability now. Got it at 55 years old. Okay. Hubby has as in like disability, what's the word? Like a pension or help with financial help, maybe. Yeah. I also like using the word cocktail for meds, but I've never really, except once when I threw out my back really bad and I was prescribed 3 different painkillers to be taken as a cocktail. But otherwise, I've just been on either antidepressants or now ADHD meds. Yes, I am also very glad that my boss is willing to meet me halfway, so to speak. And we're talking things through about systems we can put in place to make sure I don't burn out at work again. Yeah. Yes. We're taking care of that next week, I believe, or the week after. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. I'm on late. Do you have a special interest? My husband's a sports, wasn't diagnosed until our son. I found I found this question very odd when the psychologist asked me. She said, "So do you have any special interests?" And I was like, "Everybody has special interests. What are you talking about?" And she was like, "Well, something that you like get really nerdy about." And I was like, "Everybody gets nerdy about something. What are you talking about?" Anyways, yeah, I do have, I would call them genres of special interest. So I'm really into crafting, but what type of crafting, that will shift quite often. So it might be painting, it might be drawing, it might be knitting, it might be crochet. It's always shifting, but crafting like as a genre has stuck with me my entire life. And the same with reading, usually fantasy and science fiction, but that will shift as well. A couple of years ago, I only read biographies and autobiographies. But like reading and crafting is what we arrived at as being my special interests that I get all nerdy about. And if you ask me a question about them, then I won't shut up for a couple hours. And animals as well. I really like animals and plants. But yeah, I don't tend to like pick one little niche thing and just get stuck on it. I do tend to shift quite often, but like within the genre, I guess, is how I would describe it. One reason why I usually score low on autism self-assessment is I never fully developed the masking mechanism because I grew up in an environment that was somewhat autistic-like. Anyways. Okay, that's interesting. Oh yeah, okay, I see. I was like, well, if you never had to mask, then all your symptoms should show. But if you're doing a self-assessment and you don't really think about the ways you fit in, usually as a human being, you don't usually reflect on how you fit in. You reflect on how you're not fitting in. so that you can adjust to fit in better, because that's a survival mechanism of humans. They want to fit in, so in order to, and be able to survive in a group. And I guess if you are in an environment full of autistics, or with conducive to autism, I guess, then the contrast of not fitting in probably wouldn't be there, and then maybe you don't reflect on it. That's interesting. That's an interesting thing that I'm going to think about probably the rest of this evening. Let's see. Okay, it looks like there's a conversation going on between a couple others, so I'm reading them, but I'm gonna try to not pop them up. I will pop this up. I rarely wake up well rested. Doesn't help that I wake up numerous times in the night. Yeah, this is an issue for me. I have never in my life pretty much woken up well rested. And at first I thought it was because of the insomnia, and then I thought it was because I was waking up for every little sound. And now I sleep through things and I fall asleep pretty easily, but I still never wake up well rested. And I guess that's just my curse for this lifetime, or this life. Yeah, I'm always amazed that people wake up feeling well rested. I do have days where I'm not, insane tired, but I never wake up that way. I have to get up and take a shower and have breakfast and have coffee, and then I'll be like, oh, okay, I'm not tired today. Cool. But yeah. Let's put this up. If you have autism, you lack certain social skills, and it's not an issue if you're around direct people. That's true, yeah. If you have to read the subtitles to understand, yeah, exactly. And that's like you're working really hard to understand, to be able to read the subtitles that aren't even there. You kind of have to figure them out. Yeah. Let's see. There's a connection of certain trauma responses and autism ADHD, from what I've heard. It makes it tougher to figure out what's what. Yes. This was something I also talked about with the psychologist who did my evaluation. And yeah, it's true. And there are also quite a few symptoms that overlap between childhood trauma and ADHD and autism. And something that I came across a video on YouTube a long time ago, a lady who is kind of an expert on late diagnosed ADHD for people who have experienced childhood trauma. And she said something that made me think about it a little bit more. And she said that when you're dealing with the trauma, and I mean, that usually comes first. You have to deal with that first in order to be able to see if the trauma or if there's something else. And she said that the more you've healed from your trauma, that's when you might start manifesting, if you have ADHD or autism, that's when you'll start manifesting those symptoms. Because as someone who lives through childhood trauma also learns to mask a lot in order to survive. And the more you heal from that, and the more you are removing that mask, and the more you are allowing yourself to be you, authentically you, and kind of like stripping away the coping mechanisms that you learned as a child, then if the symptoms persist, then that might be ADHD or autism. And I felt like I had dealt with a lot of my trauma and a lot of the symptoms that came from that already, and I was still struggling. And also a lot of my, that I now know are ADD symptoms, got worse the further along in healing from trauma for me. And that's why I for a long time, I didn't know what the fuck was wrong with me. Sorry. But basically, then when I started looking into ADHD, and when I saw that, I was like, oh, okay, so maybe that explains why some things are getting harder for me the more I heal from trauma. Anyways, yeah. It makes it tough to evaluate. And also, usually in an evaluation, you'll speak to people who knew the person as a child. And for me, there was no one they could speak to because because nobody in my life today knew me as a child. So yeah, it was rough. It was hard to figure out. It was like a detective work. I'm gonna put this up here. Yes, we skip the small talk and go straight into the rabbit hole. This is exactly it. And I think that's why I struggle in the break room. I mean, I actually stopped eating lunch with my colleagues because for me it was such a stressful situation. It's like this small talk, and there's like an acceptable level of how deep into a subject you can get, because I mean, limited time for lunch as well and stuff. Usually I just eat lunch on my own after everybody else is done eating, because then I can be with my own thoughts, or I'll read a book or something. But yeah, the small talk is for me very confusing, and I want to get into something, get into the rabbit hole. Put this up too. Sad. Yeah. I have a wake up light. I've had one for years, actually, like 10 years, and my old one broke actually like in August or something, and it took me a couple months before I got a new one, and I have a new one now. And yeah, it helps me to wake up, but I don't think it helps my energy levels. It does help me get out of bed, but I'm still just exhausted during the darker months. Yeah. All right, so let's see. I think, oh, hello. Hi. Yes, I'm going to pop this up too, because girls have to function properly earlier than boys, so it's underdiagnosed because we tend to look for disruptive behavior. Yeah, I actually read an entire book on this, on why it's so underdiagnosed in girls. Up until it actually levels out. So the percentage of diagnosed people, like it's a lot in the boys and a little in girls, but then somewhere around age 40 in population, it levels out and it's the same. It's just that it's undiagnosed for so long in women. Yeah, because they look for disruptive behavior, and society usually does tell girls, take less space, speak softer. Yeah, different constraints. And then also, yeah, it's really hard, as always with like psychology and culture. It's hard to separate what's in the individual and what's culture, because we're not raised in a vacuum, we're raised in a culture. But yeah, I'm gonna put this up. Seems to be generational. So ADHD has been shown to be like 80% due to genetics. It's actually the mental diagnosis that has the most genetic, like proven genetic causes. And I reached out to my uncle, the only one who is not in the cult, and I asked him for a description of his 3 siblings, my mother and her 2 other brothers, of how they were in childhood and their teens. And the description I got from my uncle, I would say my mother and her brother, raging ADHD, with capital on the H, like hyper. Yeah. And I thought that was quite interesting, because I mean, my mother's never really talked about her childhood with me, because in Scientology you don't like dwell on the past. Yeah, I'm mirroring a lot too. Somehow I don't feel like I'm faking. So I never feel like I'm faking when I'm mirroring people. Sometimes I do. Hang on. Okay, let me think about it. I wouldn't say faking, but I feel like a little bit like a chameleon, only I don't think the chameleon does it control when it changes colors to its background, because that's how I feel like I was like, some part of my brain is a chameleon and it's just adjusting to whatever. And I don't have control of it, so I don't feel like I'm faking. I wouldn't say that, but I can get annoyed with myself for acting like someone else, even though I couldn't, like, I get annoyed with myself for not being able to turn that off, if that makes sense. Nice. Okay, I don't know how far behind I am. I eat to raise my mood instead. I'm glad I have anxiety rarely. Yeah, but those down low on RCC. Soppatorskdagar. Yeah, everybody has off days as well, and I also eat a lot. And this is also something that's common in ADHD. Is foods that you like will give you some dopamine. I do tend to eat when I'm bored. I tend to forget to eat when I'm doing something that's exciting, but then I get hangry, and that's not fun for anybody. But then I also eat when I'm bored, even if I'm not hungry, which is just silly. Oh, okay. So Maya says, I was put on several different antidepressant meds, never worked. ADHD meds on the other hand. Perfect. Yeah. And this just shows like having the right diagnosis and getting the right treatment does wonders. Yeah, I did one type of antidepressants for 7 years, and I do think I was depressed when I started on them, and they did like save my life at the time, but I never thrived on antidepressants. And the second type that I tried were much better, but it was still, it was still surviving. It wasn't thriving. And I feel like the ADHD meds are giving me, lowering my anxiety and giving me the executive function to do things when I need to do them. And that's giving me more energy, and I feel less depressed. But I mean, I'm still very new on these meds, so we'll see. I hope they're going to work out. Right, literally no one. I've recently been wrestling with my own ADHD symptoms. I'm undiagnosed based on what I've heard and seen online. I seem to fit all the criteria. Then I think you should speak to a doctor and see if you can get a diagnosis or get an evaluation, because I mean, maybe it's ADHD and maybe it's not, but usually part of the evaluation will be to figure out if maybe it's something else. And even if you decide to, and anybody who gets a diagnosis, I mean, doesn't automatically mean meds. It could also just be, implementing new strategies to deal with yourself and deal with life. And that's different for everybody as well. But I think it's good to learn more about oneself and about different things. And I think, if I hadn't been raised in Scientology, I probably would have been diagnosed earlier. It's just I spent so much of my life not believing in these types of things. So I never really thought about them. Like, it didn't even enter my radar. Even when I stopped believing in Scientology, I still didn't think, oh, maybe I have something else. So yeah, now I'm trying to be more curious and just look at like lots of different things and see like what else has been have I not yet discovered. Okay. Disability is financial from the government. Yeah, that's good. I'm glad that your husband, I think it was husband, gets that. I think that should be, I think help should be available to those who need it. Thank you, Miriam. I was jumping around a lot, getting stuck on different interests until I found art. Yeah. And for me, it's crafting. I really enjoy art, but I like different textures in my hands. And that changes, like what texture I want in my hands. But for me, crafting is a form of art. It's just different ways to express yourself, I think, as well. Fancy is a refuge for neurospecific people who get to be different and it's celebrated. The autistic part of our family is big into fancy. I don't understand how fancy isn't something for everyone. Doesn't everyone like a little bit of fancy? I mean, isn't what like what's weird about liking fancy? Everybody likes fancy. Or is that in my mind, everybody likes fancy? Because everybody likes stories when they were little, right? Everybody likes to hear stories. Children like to go to sleep with bedtime stories. That's all fantasy stuff. Everybody likes Disney. That's fancy. What? Yeah, but I'm not like a fancy person. I think everything is fancy if it's made up. But I also I got in an argument with the psychologist when she asked me, like, do you have special interests? And I was like, everybody has special interests. What are you talking about? And she's like, well, like maybe like fantasy. I was like, everybody likes fantasy. Get over it. Yeah, but maybe that's just me. Trauma counselors cause scars and reactions or behavior similar to the symptoms. Yes, various coping and survival mechanisms. Yeah, absolutely. And I think also growing up undiagnosed, if you have a diagnosis and you grow up undiagnosed and you're trying very hard to like fit into the normal society expectations, that's also a form of trauma, and also needs to be taken also seriously. It's it's a different kind of trauma than being raised in a cult, but it's also a form of trauma. And yeah, and trauma will do weird things to you, as I've learned, at least. Cult of Scientology, hello, good to see you too. Hello, Fluffer. Oh, my love. I'm so far behind, guys. I'm going to try to catch up. Okay. Oh, Marilyn's here. Hello, Marilyn. Sorry, guys. I'm trying to catch up real quick. Cats hate cults. Cats hate cults. I understand that cats would hate cults because cats do not like being told what to do. Greetings from snowy New Jersey. I'm guessing it's New Jersey. Good to see you. Loving this discussion. I have a 12-year-old great nephew with ADHD. Oh, I'm glad. I think everybody knows somebody who's a little spicy. Chameleons adapt to the environment automatically. Yeah, I think that's how I feel. Like my masking has been that. And now I'm trying to consciously notice when I'm adapting so that I can try to not do that, because I want to be me, and I think I need to figure out a little bit who me is sometimes. How do you think the cult life fits a person with ADHD? Do you think you would have to mask all times? I think this is a very interesting question because, as I said, I think my mother has ADHD. And I think it's very hard to answer this because it will be very different for everyone, and it'll also be very different depending on the cult. So my mother and her one of her younger brothers, I think both have ADHD, and my mother is in the Sea Org. And in the Sea Org, it is so structured that you don't need to have an executive function, because the cult is acting as your executive function. In my experience and from my perspective. Basically, so for me, like one of my hardest things, I get distracted easily and I go off on tangents, and you know, I have a hard time concentrating because of all the thoughts that are just storming about in my head. But for me, one of the things that makes life really hard is my executive function. Like I know I need to do something, but I just can't get started, or I can't finish. And that's, I didn't need that in the Sea Org. I didn't need to be able to make myself start or do or finish a task, because the Sea Org was making me do it. So the Sea Org was being my executive function. Because there's always someone watching you. I mean, there's someone who tells you when to get up, and you're in a room of people and they all getting up at the same time. And then there's like musters, and then there's, you know, you're constantly being watched and you're being made to do the things, and you don't need to think about it. You don't need to decide or have the motivation or the self-discipline to do the thing, because it's either you're doing it or it's a hard punishment. And there was a section of my life in the Sea Org where I was not under this type of control. And I would say my ADHD presented itself then in those few hours a day for about 2 years, when I had this little window of less control in the Sea Org. And I knew what I needed to do, and I could never make myself do it. And I got in so much trouble every day. And I'm going to stop talking about it now because it's getting me upset. But for my mother, I think my mother has ADHD. And there has been some anecdotal evidence that the ADHD, the hyperactivity part of it calms down as you get older. But I think for her, her life is so structured in a way that she doesn't need an executive function to do anything. She doesn't have to make decisions. She just does what's put in front of her because she doesn't have a choice. And I think that maybe that suited her. Maybe she is functioning better in life because of that imposed executive function. And maybe she wasn't functioning as well outside of the Sea Org because she's undiagnosed ADHD. But yeah, her younger brother, who I think also has ADHD, he's not in the Sea Org, and I do see his life being a little bit chaotic. But I don't. Yeah, it's a very hard question, but a very good one, and I'm probably going to think about it a little more. Okay, let's move on. Permanently exhausted pigeon. Yes. This, yep. I identify as well as a permanently exhausted pigeon. Okay, I think I'm going to have to skip forward a little bit because I don't know how far behind I am. So if you put up a comment and you're like, this is super important, put it up again, because I'm going to scroll to the bottom now. Okay. I'm going to try to catch some. Okay. All right. I'll scroll to the bottom. So if I missed your comment and you want me to read it and add it to the conversation, then post it again, because I'm all caught up. I did want to talk a little bit about Stockholm Syndrome. I see we've already been going for an hour, and I thought this was going to be 20 minutes. But I'm because I've had a few comments previously where I've been asked to explain Stockholm Syndrome, and I think I've been asked that because it's in my handle, right? It's in my YouTube handle, and Second Gem Stockholm Syndrome. So I'm gonna talk a little bit about it. And I had planned on making notes and drawing diagrams, but I didn't. And so here we go. Stockholm Syndrome is not a diagnosis. It's not in the DSM-5, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual, version number 5, which is one that it's the big book with all the diagnoses. And there's a second one as well, but I never remember what that one's called. Stockholm Syndrome is, so basically, I'm going to put this up. Yeah. Another term for Stockholm Syndrome is trauma bonding. Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna talk a little bit what I know about Stockholm Syndrome, and I don't know a lot because I am not a psychologist and I haven't studied this. But this is what I know. There was a bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden, in like 1973 or 74. I think it was like, I know it was in August. I think it was 73. And there were 4 hostages taken in the bank, 3 women and 1 man. And they were held for 6 days. And they people say that they bonded with the bank robbers, so the people that were holding them hostage. So that the women that were hostages and the men, the hostages bonded with the hostage takers. And this was called Norrmalmstorgssyndromet, which is a Swedish word for the place where the bank was. But I mean, Americans couldn't really say Norrmalmstorgssyndromet, so they said Stockholm Syndrome. Yeah, and I'm just gonna pop this up. They started helping the beggars. Basically, and I think there's a lot of nuance that needs to be looked at, but basically, yeah, like it was presented to the media that they were helping the bankers and they were trying to protect the bankers from the police. And yeah, and this, I mean, this was big news. And then not long after, in the United States, so the poster child for Stockholm Syndrome in the United States is a lady by the name of Patty Hearst. And I see someone just put that up. So the Patty Hearst was in the United States, and and this is what made Stockholm Syndrome a big name in the US. So after the bank robbery, blah blah, there was a Time article about the bank robbery, and in the Times article, or the New York Times, some paper, and they talked about Stockholm Syndrome. And Patty Hearst's, when she was arrested and on trial, her lawyer used Stockholm Syndrome as a defense, which failed because she went to jail. But Patty Hearst, what happened was Patty Hearst was kidnapped. And she was kidnapped and she was held hostage for a long time, and nobody found her for a while. And then all of a sudden she shows up at a bank robbery. So that's what's in common, the bank robberies. She shows up at a bank robbery. She's carrying a gun, and she's participating in a bank robbery, and kind of disappears off the map for a little bit, and reappears in a video that she filmed, or somebody filmed. And she says her name is Tanya. She changed her name. She's part of this guerrilla movement, Symbionese Liberation Army. They had like a political agenda. So there's already a difference. The people who kidnapped Patty Hearst had some sort of political agenda, whereas the bank robbers in Stockholm, Sweden, they were just trying to get money and also get a friend of theirs out of jail, I think. And Patty Hearst read like the manifesto of this political movement in a media statement as well. And anyways, that little group were, some of them were killed, a lot of them were killed in a police raid, and some were captured, and they were all of them sent to prison, including Patty Hearst. And so there are basically what people think of Stockholm Syndrome is basically you're a hostage, and then you start to have feelings of compassion for the hostage taker. Either you adopt their political views, or you have compassion for them. And so there are so many different nuances to look at that I think aren't really made publicly available to everybody. But for example, if we're thinking about the hostages in the bank, they were worried about the police coming in hot in the bank, like, coming in with their weapons and being shot. They were worried about being shot by the police. And the bank robbers were actually taking care of them and making sure that they got food. And one of the ladies got her period while being a hostage, and they called the police and said, hey, send in, feminine hygiene projects. So, being a hostage, of course, you don't want to be taken hostage, and you also don't want to be shot by the police. And maybe you're just trying to survive the situation. And maybe you see that the best way to survive the situation is to be cooperative with the person who's holding you hostage. Patty Hearst was put through horrendous treatment. She was kidnapped and put through horrendous treatment. It's not like she went and joined this little guerrilla group, right? So Stockholm Syndrome, yeah, I see it, in my opinion, it's a way to survive. It's a way to survive the situation. You don't know what's going on. You don't know what's going to happen. You're just bonding, or maybe not trauma bonding, maybe with the other people, I guess. But also, you're looking for ways to make sense of the situation and a good way to survive it. And sometimes that means, trying to befriend your hostage taker. And sometimes it means being convinced of what their political views are. And sometimes it's, staying in an abusive relationship and trying to convince yourself that the person loves you and that you love them. And I think people talk about Stockholm Syndrome and cults, is like an overlap between brainwashing and Stockholm Syndrome. And I think there is a form of overlap there. But mostly I would say, Stockholm Syndrome is not a diagnosis. It's not in the DSM-5. There's not enough research on it. It's like one guy a Swedish psychologist who was talking to the hostages in the bank, that coined the term, and then a few other people have looked into it. And there has been like meta studies done on hostages protecting or bonding with hostage takers, and the percent is like really, really, really low. But yeah, I think it's a trauma response and a survival mechanism of what's going on in the moment. And I haven't found any like longitudinal studies about people who have had Stockholm Syndrome and like 20 years later, what did they think about it? I haven't seen anything like that, which would be interesting. But yeah, so it's not actually a thing. It's not a diagnosis on its own, but it is a trauma response. It is a survival mechanism, and it's only in my handle kind of as a joke, because I live in Stockholm. And when I first woke up from Scientology, I was listening to a podcast on, like cults and religions and stuff. And I wanted to donate to them on Patreon because I thought they were really good podcasts. And I was super paranoid about Scientology finding out that it was me. So I needed a handle. But I wanted the podcast creators to know it was me, but I didn't want to let Scientology know. So I took the handle Stockholm Syndrome, and they knew it was me, and Scientology didn't know it was me. And that's kind of how that came about. I hope that was interesting for you guys, and I hope I explained it well. That's Stockholm Syndrome. It, as I know it. Ask a psychologist, you'll probably get a totally different answer. Okay, I'm going to try to see if there's any questions about that. Here we go. Difference was in Stockholm situation, they were more strangers to each other, but dynamics are the same as, yeah. So there's always an issue with power dynamics in any situation that would create something like Stockholm Syndrome, and also power dynamics in abusive relationships and cults, and also just in everyday life as well. Power dynamics are actually pretty interesting. Pretty interesting things to look at and try to comprehend. Yeah. There was a discussion about if Patty Hearst was in contact them with before. Yeah, and I have found no evidence pointing to this at all. But I haven't researched it. I looked into it a little bit, and I've Googled around and stuff, but I haven't researched it. So I have read a little bit about what she was put through when she was kidnapped, and I don't think that is something she would have asked for, because it was very, very bad and horrendous. Let's see. So this is in response to something else. Have never understood gaslighting. And I think gaslighting is also something that's really interesting to try to explain and parse out, but maybe we'll do that another day. Yeah, and this is also a little bit of the issue with talking about cults and stuff. There's so many terms that have become to mean things that they aren't, and also have become so generalized and also so polarized. I mean, cult, for example, and gaslighting and brainwashing, and so many words that, people who do research into cults and brainwashing and gaslighting stuff, they don't usually use those terms because they're not specific enough or niche enough for different types of coercive control and stuff like that. But I use them because those are words that people recognize. But yeah, so many terms used loosely, but there's some deep meanings to them. Exactly. And it's, yeah, that's something that's also really hard with. And so I'm not a researcher, but I have done a bachelor's thesis. And, when I was writing my thesis, I had to write out, these are terms I'm going to use, and this is how I define them within this thesis. And I think that's also like people who don't do research or stuff like that, they don't realize that a lot of people just use terms without like defining them exactly. And then they get thrown around and blah, 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 blah. Yes, human behavior is fascinating. And it's also because we're all so different and we're all going to react differently. So it's really hard to, define one type of behavior as well. Here's a comment. Let's see. One aspect is the women in the drama felt maternal instincts for robbers. Okay, the women in the bank robbery in Stockholm felt maternal instincts for the robbers when they saw frustration and desperation. Yeah. Through appeasement. Yeah, you raise your own chances of survival last time. Yes, so I agree. Also, I mean, we don't live in a society that is easy to survive, and I think sometimes you can agree with things that a hostage taker is saying without agreeing with the methods, right? And that can be also misinterpreted by the media as switching sides or whatever you want to call it. Yes. Patty Hearst was the grand-granddaughter of the newspaper guy Hearst. So yeah, she was a rich heiress. Yeah, super wealthy. And also, so like when she was kidnapped, one of the demands that the group made for her release, which they then never released her, was that the Hearst family would feed the poor of the city. And like, who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want the poor fed? That's not something like I'm not against that. I am against the kidnapping, of course, and the treatment of Patty Hearst while she was being held hostage. I'm not against feeding the poor. So like, you know, there's, but then there's so many nuances, and nuance is hard to understand or hard to discuss around the water cooler. So. Okay, so I'm way behind again on the comments. Mactmidro Gail, I see your comment. I'm not gonna put it up here because I want to try to round off the stream. But if you want to send me an email and talk about something, then please do send me an email. That sounds not nice to what you went through there. Those books, let's see. Yes, I think there are books about it. There's also a movie. There's a Hollywood movie about Stockholm Syndrome. I'm sure there are books about Patty Hearst. I think she's done an autobiography. I might read that, maybe. Yeah, I think the needs of the robbers resonated with needs of being there and supporting someone. Oh, okay, yeah, and I mean that's human nature, you know, to band up and match needs, and yeah. I'm very much reading about psychology, behavior, and human interactions, 5 points at HR. That's great. That's lovely. I'm actually doing a psychology course. I've been doing it all autumn, but I'm so far behind, and I just didn't do the exam. I was also sick on the day of the exam. But there's a retake exam coming up in 2 weeks, and I hope I'm going to be ready for it. But I have been fascinated by stuff I have read recently, which was, yeah, I'm reading psychology, and it felt very controversial when I started, but I'm just fascinated by everything that I've read in the book. Okay, I'm going to just scroll down to the bottom. And okay. So this was my first video back for the new year, and hopefully I will get into some sort of routine, and I would like to have like a schedule, posting schedule or something. But I'm not going to promise too much because I don't know. We'll see. We'll find out. But I will try to be a little bit more frequent, and if I'm aiming to do the pre-recorded videos, but I feel like maybe if I haven't made pre-recorded videos in a while, then I'll just hop on and just talk, I guess. And we'll do something like this. And I mean, this worked out okay, I hope. All right, so thank you so much for coming in. Thanks for all the questions and the comments and saying hi. If you guys have any questions that you want my opinion on for some reason, or any questions you want to ask about Scientology, let me know in the comments, send me an email, whatever. I might be changing my handle pretty soon, but if you're subscribed, I guess you'll find me anyways. I don't think you get unsubscribed if I change my handle. Yeah, thanks again. Thanks for listening. Take care of you all. take care of your mental health. And, if you want to reach out and talk to me, just send me an email. I do have a few that I haven't answered yet, and I'm very sorry. I will be getting around to it soon, I promise. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.